My name is Andrea Randall. I am the school social worker at Canton Central School. I've been at Canton Central School for the past 4 years, and previous to that, I worked at the St. Lawrence Psychiatric Center in Ogdensburg, New York. I've been a licensed clinical social worker for 25, 26 years. And I wanted to share some information with you about COVID-19 and how it's affecting the school where I work. So we'll get started. I want to talk a little bit about pandemic fatigue. I think it's a global phenomenon. I think we're all feeling it. From a school perspective, teachers are working essentially 2 jobs. They're creating online platforms and online schooling for kids who might be fully remote, kids who are partially remote, so in person some of the time, online some of the time, as well as all of the in-person work that they are creating. Students are also shifting back and forth. Some parents are pulling their kids to fully remote as numbers increase, or putting kids back in kind of an in-person setting as grades drop. So kids are kind of moving back and forth, which creates an awful lot of work for the teaching staff. Additionally, a lot of students are falling behind academically. A lot of work. Families and students are coping with constant uncertainty, constant changing of schedules. Will the school be open tomorrow? Will they be closed? Do they have enough staff to open? Oh, how many cases are there? And now we have to quarantine so we don't open. There's just so much uncertainty happening. And families are trying to figure out how they're going to supervise their kids and help teach their kids and continue to work their own jobs. Mental health issues are increasing in our youth. This is not necessarily due to the pandemic, but there definitely is a lack of resources and access to things. Here in the North Country, we just don't have a lot of access. There's a lot of waiting lists. It's not easy to access mental health services for anybody, whether you're a youth or whether you're an adult. Certainly the pandemic has created a larger gap in resources that we would traditionally use. For example, sports or clubs, things that we would encourage kids to be a part of to help with mental health, we don't have access to in the same way. Another real issue is finding students. In a typical school day, maybe we would see somebody in the hallway who's looking really down or really sad, or somebody comes and says, there's a student crying in the bathroom, or we go into the cafeterias and we look for students who are sitting alone or who look really upset. Teachers who say to us, so-and-so is just not themselves today, or there's something worrying me that this student wrote in one of their assignments. All of that stuff is so much more challenging because we're not seeing the kids on a daily basis the way that we traditionally would see them, checking in with them and things like that we would do when we're in person. And building rapport and relationships over a computer is just not ideal. It's a huge challenge. And teachers as well as school counselors are faced with that and are working really hard to do the best they can with that. As we know, relationships are really key. They're key in terms of listening to your teacher or wanting to work for your teacher, is having a good relationship with your teacher. And all of that becomes a lot more challenging when you're remote. And the same is true for counseling. Having a good relationship with the kids I work with and the families I work with makes a huge difference in terms of the progress we can make and the work we can do together. So pre-pandemic, just a couple of slides on mental health in school before the pandemic. There has definitely been an increase in mental health issues in our schools across our children and youth. So there are just some statistics that I listed. Between 2007 and 2012, there's a 20% increase in diagnoses of anxiety for kids ages 6 to 17. 3.2 million adolescents between the ages of 12 and 17 experience at least one major depressive disorder. That's over 13% of the US population of adolescents. Nearly 20% of all teenagers experience depression before adulthood. Pediatric diagnoses of bipolar has doubled between 95 and 2014. There's been a significant increase, about 17% increase in anxiety disorders in the past 10 years. So you can see just with all of these bullets, I don't have to read each one of them, but there's been an increase in mental health issues across the board for our youth, for our children and our youth. And we know that access to services is challenging. Sometimes people don't know, how do you determine what is maybe natural adolescent behavior, kind of teenage angst, and what is a budding mental health issue or some mental health symptoms that we're seeing. Mental health affects everybody. It's across all economic factors, races, religion. Everybody is at risk of mental health. So it's not one group or one subset. And it definitely is something I think that school districts and people are paying more attention to. It's why there are some school social workers now here in the North Country. More than when I started almost 5 years ago, there really were no school social workers in the North Country. And now quite a few school districts have them as a way to try to give some mental health services in the school and identify kids that are needing these supports. So things we've been offering to the community at large since the pandemic started. In March, we set up a family resource page, on our district website. And that family resource page offered tons of stuff. It offered information about food stamps and Medicaid and housing information. It offered different articles. It offered information on emergency services such as reach out, any kind of 24/7 type of emergency contact. It also listed the guidance counselors, the school counselors, and myself as resources as well. We had hoped maybe to have just one place where people could find lots of resources easily. And we've continued to update that as we've gone forward and found more information. We also set up a Canton Golden Bears health and wellness page on both Facebook and Instagram, and we post daily to that with information that we think would be helpful for the community. Banford has a elementary school Facebook page themselves. They share resources and tools that are aimed towards younger students and families. The middle school has an ongoing electronic newsletter. Again, resources and tools and academic info. You can get links right through the middle school newsletter that is sent out right to the homework pages and the way to access Google Classroom. So trying to make sure we're giving people all the information they need in multiple places. The high school also has a weekly newsletter, lots of guidance, resources and updates, hotline numbers, and community resources. Again, more specific to older students, but trying to reach as many people as we can. We also recognized that the school staff was having struggles. I mean, it's kind of a global phenomenon. The pandemic is affecting everyone. So of course it's affecting school staff. And so in April, we started something called, we started it with coffee with counselors, and then we kind of changed it to conversation with counselors because not everybody likes coffee. But it started out as a virtual once a week session where the school counselors or myself were just on an open Zoom and inviting staff to come in and talk with us and whenever it was feasible to do it. And it was really, I think, meaningful for staff. And sometimes it would just be chit-chatting. Other times it would be real, genuine support and camaraderie. So that was something we thought was helpful. In September, the school district, as part of planning, decided that every Wednesday would be a virtual Wednesday. So students would be fully virtual each Wednesday, and allows teachers time to connect with students that are fully virtual, as well as lesson plan and coordinate. And staff have told me that it's been unbelievably helpful to know that every Wednesday they can catch up, connect with kids that they're not seeing or finding, reach out to families, and coordinate together. Teachers being able to get together and talk about what they can do either as a department or as a team. For example, the 7th grade team being able to meet, talk about kids that they're sharing concerns with, and then planning accordingly for them. In October, we started a Wednesday wellness email and newsletter as a way to just put information out to all of the staff, so the entire domain at Canton Central School. It had everything from recipes. We offer real quick mindfulness and breathing tips, stress reduction, articles we think they might find helpful. So we do that every Wednesday. One of our PE teachers started a weekly trivia email, which we thought was great. So every Wednesday he puts out a trivia email, and the first couple of staff that answer the question correctly, he gets them some kind of treat. I think it's usually like a bakery type of treat, which is really neat. October, we also have food trucks that were coming once in a while, maybe bakery items that were offered. Staff got together and started doing either potluck breakfast or lunches on certain Wednesdays. So just staff themselves trying to come together and do something to help themselves morale-wise. This January, our union decided we were going to offer something called the chaplain service to staff. The idea really sprang from one of our school counselors who worked as a chaplain, so to speak, through her sorority back in college, and essentially for staff that are either in crisis or need support or have loved ones that they want information for support on, that we would be identified as being the people they would go to. So that would be myself and Lindsay Fifield, another one of the school counselors, who are the identified chaplains. And it could be something as simple as, I'm on the verge of tears and I just need to go to the bathroom for 5 minutes and collect myself. Give us a call. We'll come to the classroom and cover you so that you can just pull yourself together. Something as simple as that is hugely meaningful to staff. Things we're offering students and families. So, with the opening of school, the decision was made, as most school districts did, to offer a hybrid model. And that would allow as many students as possible to be in-person learning. Because of the social distancing requirements, we couldn't have everybody there every day, but we could get everybody there every other day. IEP and 504 students would continue to attend 4 days a week. And again, that's because every Wednesday is a virtual Wednesday, so it'd be 4 days a week. And then grades K through 5 would come 4 days a week as well. Parents always have the option of keeping their children in a fully remote model if they feel that's in their best interest. Buses deliver needed items every Wednesday to students and families. That might be art kits, that might be something from the technology department, it might be textbooks. It's whatever the staff feel is important to get out to those students that maybe can't come to school to pick it up, especially those students that are fully remote and can't come to school to pick it up. Every student has a Chromebook that needs one. There's an online library system that we work really hard to make sure our students and families are aware of. Free food is available. That's something that is happening, I think, all across New York State, where the state education department has decided to make the food reimbursable for all students 18 and under. And so the district works really hard to make sure we have 7 days worth of food, breakfast and lunch, available for all kids that want it. So we ask people sign up just so we have a sense of how much food to prepare. But they work really hard and distribute hundreds of bags of food every week. In December, the school counseling staff and myself decided we were going to have an open Zoom. So the 2 weeks prior to our holiday break, we had an open Zoom, and we just kind of rotated our counseling staff through it, where the Zoom was just open from 8 a.m. to, I think it was 2:30 every day. And we each took an hour and we rotated, just so that if any students or staff or families felt that they needed something urgently, they could just pop on and talk with us. We didn't have a lot of people that did, but we did have a few. We did that in response to the suicide crisis. We felt it was important to just be available in the easiest capacity possible to the community. Especially with the holidays, which can be stressful anyway. So that was just something else that we offered. The counseling department itself delivers a ton of food and other necessities to certain homes and do a ton of home visits. When I worked at the St. Lawrence Psychiatric Center with children and youth, I had no idea how much the school counselors were in the community and visiting homes and reaching out to people and doing things such as buying holiday meals and delivering them to students and families in need. It was amazing when I started working at Canton and realizing how much outreach the counseling department did. So it's really a tremendous thing that they do. That's also something that happens a lot on Wednesdays. We do a lot of home visits where we're either going out and trying to find kids that we can't connect with. Maybe they're not responding to our emails, they're not responding to phone calls. We just go out and see if we can find them. So that happens a lot on Wednesdays as well. The district offers hotspots, which are called, I guess the brand is a Khajiit, to families that are in need. It's something else that we started this year. For students that are in counseling services with outside providers, for the most part, since the pandemic, those counseling services have been remote. And so I have offered for quite a few of the kids I work with to be able to meet with their outside providers during school hours. They can do it in my room at school, get your Chromebook out, talk to your counselor since it's remote anyways. And we're finding that's really helpful. They're missing a lot less school time, and it reduces no-shows for families that maybe forget or just can't get to school to take their student to the appointment. So that's something that we're working hard with outside providers and coordinating. We have Student of the Month awards, really just trying to engage students in doing the best they can. Student of the Month does not have to necessarily be the highest achieving kids. It could be kids that have just done a really great job trying for that month. And so they might be someone who's eligible for a Student of the Month award. Right before we went remote, before the holidays, we decided to do music. So we were playing music during homeroom. Staff could enter which song they'd like, and then students could pick which staff they think maybe chose a certain song. So that was kind of fun, just trying to do something fun as much as possible at school. Issues of concern for staff. So the pandemic has really brought up some issues that maybe weren't necessarily things that staff had considered before. Boundaries are a big one. Where does my day begin and where does it end? Staff that might use their cell phones if they're working from home to call families. Do I do that? And does that mean then the family can call me at 10:30 at night because they can't figure out an assignment or they're not sure what to do? Is that something I should be doing? We had a lot of discussion early in the fall about accepting assignments 24/7. So in the spring, when the pandemic had first really gotten underway and all the schools were remote, we were kind of accepting assignments 24 hours a day. I mean, as long as a student submitted it, a teacher would accept it. But that led to unbelievable work for teachers who maybe were, saying, here's a deadline, and then 2 weeks later, an assignment's coming in at 3 a.m. Should they still accept it? What's going to be considered late? So we've really had to put some boundaries around what that means so that teachers wouldn't be working 24/7. Motivation for teachers and students is reduced. I mean, that's a study that I saw, but you can see it just in meeting with kids. It's tough. My 8th grader herself the other day said that, these Zoom meetings really kill the vibe. That's what she said. And I totally agree. It gets to be a lot. And, for those kids, especially when we're fully virtual for a while, day after day of just being in front of a screen, that gets tough. It really gets tough. It gets tough for teachers and for the students. And I'm sure for parents as well. We're concerned about the possibility of higher dropout rates. We're concerned about retaining more students, kids that might have failing grades that maybe aren't going to pass the entire year, maybe aren't going to pass certain classes. It's definitely a concern for us. We're concerned about a pretty likely increase in academic gaps. For a student who maybe is really not engaged and just not doing any of the work. What does that mean in terms of a gap in their academics moving forward? Problems could well extend into the future. If we are, hopefully next school year looks a whole lot different. We're hoping next school year looks a lot more normal per se. How are we going to get kids back in the building? Even for those kids that'll say to me that they really don't like remote learning, they miss seeing people, they acknowledge, some of the kids I work with acknowledge that remote learning has been really hard for them. They're not doing as well. They're not interested. they're falling behind. And yet, I think it's going to be a challenge for them to come back into the building every single day, to get back into that routine. So it's definitely things that we're thinking about. For students, there's concerns. I think students themselves are concerned about failing grades and academic gaps. Some students are really hard to find. It's a challenge when I'm not hearing back from students. I know students don't check their emails a lot, and then they're getting so many emails that it's very easy for emails to get lost, especially if kids don't have that skill to organize their emails and things like that. So it's tricky for some kids to find some of our students. A lot of kids have gained weight. I see that just studies have shown that as well, but you can see that just looking at our students when we are in person. I think part of it is a lack of exercise. They're not moving as much. With the pandemic, they're not getting out as much, not socializing. We don't have sports the way we did. But even school in and of itself, you tend to move around, you walk up the stairs, you move around. So if you're not in school every single day and you're just home, you're not moving your body as much. A lot of concern about too much screen time. Kids love screens. So on top of YouTube or TikTok or whatever else they might be watching, they're now on how many Zoom meetings a day and doing work online. So it's a lot of screen time. Lack of routine and structure, lack of motivation and boredom. For parents that are working or maybe can't supervise their kids as much, the routine and structure is just not there like it would be if you had to get up at a certain time, you go to school, your school day is structured. So those are things that are pretty concerning that we're seeing as challenges for our kids. A lot less activities that kids need to stay interested in school, clubs, groups, sports, all of those things kids really love. And a lot of kids will say, football is the only reason that I come to school. So when you don't have that, how do you keep an interest of a kid? I think our musical department, our band department has done a tremendous job of keeping kids involved. They're not playing as a band all together all the time, but they're really working, and our choral instructor too, really working hard to keep them interested. We're hoping to do a musical this year. I don't know what it's going to look like. It may be individually pieced and then put together, but it's something that our teachers really want to make sure we're still doing for our kids the best that we can. Increasing rates of depression and anxiety. 1 in 4 high school students has considered suicide. That's tough. That's tough to swallow. And when we're seeing our kids less, how do we identify them? How do we support them? How do we do that? In talking with a guidance counselor friend of mine who's one of the guidance counselors up in Messina, and he just said, we're just not good at this. We're not good at working with our kids remotely. And he's right. We're not. This is not something we're used to. There's tremendous meaning when you're seeing someone face to face and you're able to look at all of those cues that you see. Their posture, how are they walking in the hallway? What is their interaction like with other kids? I'm looking out in the hallway and this kid just slams their locker really hard. That tells me that, maybe he's having a rough moment. All of these things that we can't see and identify as easily now. And it's hugely concerning for us. For families, there's an increased child protective involvement. No family likes to hear that Child Protective Services is going to be involved, but we unfortunately have an increasing amount of students with very poor attendance or truancy. Those kids that we just can't find, they're not coming to school, they're not attending, they show up once and then they're gone for another 20 days. That winds up sometimes in child protective involvement. And nobody wants to do that. But often we feel like we have to because we don't know what else to do to try to get through to some of these families and reach some of these families. For families teaching and supervising their kids when they're working full time, that's a challenge. That's really a challenge. I mean, I'm lucky that I have a college student and an 8th grader. My 8th grader is pretty self-sufficient, but I can't imagine what it would be like to work full time and have really young kids. That's tough. and challenging. And we recognize that. That's tough for families. The other thing COVID has done is COVID's made it very clear how much need exists for so many of our families. I was really amazed back in the spring when all the schools went remote, that one of the primary concerns was not about academics. The primary concern was feeding our kids and making sure that kids had enough food to eat. Did families have food that would get them through the weekend? It was shocking. And I've worked in this field a long time and I know the need, but really COVID brought it crystal clear how much need existed, as well as kind of making it clear for families how much they rely on school. So many families saying, what are we going to do now that the kids aren't in school? How do I supervise them? What should I do? How do I motivate them to do what they need to do? A lot of parenting issues. School does a lot of things for kids and families. And when you're not in person every day, I think it becomes really clear that it's a tremendous loss for people, loss for the staff and for counselors, but a loss for the families as well. So what are we trying? What are we trying to do to reach these kids and reach these families and keep everybody just going one step at a time? Doing as much outreach as we can. I mean, calling, letters, emails, home visits. The vast majority of families are super appreciative of any kind of outreach that we're doing. And it's just because we can't see them necessarily as easily, it's just a lot more outreach. So we'll continue to do that. The superintendents collaborate and share information as well. That's something I think that's hugely beneficial to every school district in the county. If you want, you can always go back and look at the first few slides. They talk a lot about what we're offering to the community and students and families and to staff. That also talks a little bit about what we're trying. Other school districts, I talked to some of my colleagues in Governor, and Governor is doing some things like extended day remote programs. So they have kind of the way our counseling program had an open Zoom where we just kind of manned it, switched off every hour or so. They have something similar from 4 to 6 during the week for teaching staff that are just kind of there. People can come on, get help with any kind of academics. They also have counseling virtual offices, and we have that as well. Again, where people can log on and get supports and get needed information that they're looking for. So there is some good news. I don't want to be a total bummer when I'm doing this, because I think there's always good news. There's less behavioral problems and referrals this school year. I was thinking about this the other day. I get every single behavior referral that is sent to the Dean of Students at Canton, and I'm included in that. And it's really interesting. I started thinking, I haven't seen very many of those at all. Part of it is that there's less kids in the building at any one time. So when we are open and at a hybrid model, there's roughly half of the amount of kids that are in the building. It allows teachers to connect with those kids in a very different way. It allows behaviors to be corrected much more easily and managed. So in some ways, it's been really nice to have less kids because you connect on a much more personal level. It also leads to more connections with families. I think the amount of outreach we've done has really allowed us to connect with families that we maybe necessarily wouldn't have talked with as much, gotten to know as much. And that's been really nice too. Staff are recognizing the importance of relationships with their students. We talk a lot about relationships, the counseling department, and myself as a social worker. We talk a lot about relationships in general, but I think teachers are recognizing it too. Like, it really is meaningful to have a good relationship. Students really learn from people they like. They don't learn as well from people they don't like. And liking someone can be simply a matter of just getting to know them a little bit, forming that relationship. It's been really great to see. Families recognizing the importance of school in their lives, it's another plus. I think across the whole nation, people are recognizing the importance of school and how hard teachers work. And I think that's really good news. Some kids are really thriving. I've got certain kids. I think of one student in particular. He's a senior. He is doing so amazing with being fully remote. It's allowed him to take photographs and spend a lot of time doing this creative stuff that he wouldn't necessarily have been able to do if he was physically in school 6 hours a day. He is thriving in a way that I did not think he would thrive. So sometimes being remote has really been an opportunity for some of our kids, and that's been awesome to see. So thank you so much.